If I'm still here, breathing, walking, living, it's because of her. She never knew, maybe she never will. But Evelyn saved me, not with medicine or orders or some heroic act, but with something quieter, something gentler, a smile, a promise, a moment that stayed with me, even when everything else fell apart. It was 1943. The world was burning, and I was headed to North Africa with the 9th Infantry Division. We were being shipped out from Fort Dix, but before that, I stopped in upstate New York to see her. Evelyn lived with her grandmother in a house that always smelled like pie and wood smoke. I remember the porch swing creaking under our weight, the way she looked at me like I was already gone, and the silence that hung between us like a curtain neither of us dared to move. She thought I'd be back in a few months. So did I. But war stretches time like taffy, pulls it so far you forget what shape it was to begin with. What was supposed to be a few months turned into years. Long, dry, unforgiving years. The last thing she said to me was, "Promise me you'll come back, even if it's just to tell me what it was all for." And I did. I promised. I looked her in the eye, held her hand one last time, and I promised with every part of me that hadn't yet learned what war really meant. I didn't know then how much I'd cling to that moment. I didn't know that through nights filled with gunfire and days buried in sand, her face would be the only clear thing left in my memory. I didn't know how often I'd whisper her name, not out loud, but in that place deep in your chest, where all the pain lives. I never wrote her, not once. I couldn't. I didn't want her to see what I'd become, or worse, to remind me of what I used to be. But I did write. Dozens of letters I never sent. I kept them all in a rusted tin with a dried flower she gave me the day I left. That tin went everywhere with me, from Tunisia to Sicily to France. While others prayed to make it home, I just prayed I'd remember the way she smiled. And somehow, I made it. I survived, but I never went back to her. I thought maybe it was kinder that way. Do you ever wonder what holds a man together when the world tries to rip him apart? For me, it was Evelyn, even if she never knew. If this story touches you like it touched me to write it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing stories that move, inspire, and stay with you. And now, get ready, because what comes next will change everything. I grew up in the Hudson Valley, just outside Kingston, where summers smelled like cut grass and wood smoke, and winters came in heavy and fast, draping the world in silence. That town was small, one of those places where everyone knew your middle name, and if your bike showed up 2 blocks over, someone was already calling your mother. That's where I met Evelyn. We were kids, just kids. And I didn't know then that the girl who used to race me barefoot through apple orchards would someday become the single thread holding me together in the middle of a war. Her family moved into the farmhouse down the road when we were both about 10. She was stubborn, louder than I expected, and she laughed with her whole body, shoulders shaking, head tilted back, like laughter was something sacred. We grew up like cousins in the same big family, never quite talking about what we felt, but always knowing it was there, just under the surface, like the creek that ran beneath the hill behind my father's barn. Evelyn loved books. She'd read under trees, in haylofts, in the middle of chores, one hand picking green beans while the other held a page open with her thumb. She told me once that if the world ever ended, she hoped she'd be in the middle of a story, so she wouldn't notice the silence coming. I never forgot that. When the war broke out, everything changed. Slowly, then all at once. I enlisted early, not out of glory, not even duty, but because I couldn't bear the waiting. My father had served in France in the Great War, and though he never spoke of it, I knew the weight he carried by the way he stared at the fireplace on quiet nights. The day I got my orders, I didn't tell Evelyn right away. I couldn't. I carried that letter in my pocket for 3 days before walking up to her grandmother's porch and sitting beside her in the swing we'd carved our initials into 5 summers earlier. She was humming something, a hymn maybe, and when I finally told her, she stopped mid-note. Didn't cry, didn't flinch. She just reached out and held my hand. "What do I do while you're gone?" she asked, looking at the mountains beyond the cornfield. You live, I said. You keep reading. You keep laughing like the world still makes sense. And then she said it. The thing that would follow me into every trench, across every desert, through every sleepless, blood-stained night. Promise you'll come back, even if it's just to tell me what it was all for. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat closed up, and I knew that if I tried, I'd break. So I kissed her forehead and left before the sun fully set. My mother gave me a Bible. My father shook my hand like I was already gone. Evelyn, she gave me a tiny wildflower, pressed in wax paper, and said, "So you won't forget where you're from." I tucked it in my breast pocket. I kept it there through the ship ride, through the drills, through the heat of Tunisian sand and the salt of Sicilian wind. That flower became my compass, the only thing not issued by the army that felt real in a world of khaki and metal. I didn't know what I'd face. No one did. The pamphlet said we'd be home by Christmas. But Christmas came and went, and all I had was a mess kit, a cot, and the memory of a girl standing barefoot in a summer field, asking me to come back whole. And so I tried. I tried to hold on to the boy I was before the noise, before the fear, before the things no one tells you your eyes will see. Evelyn became a kind of prayer I didn't even know how to say. In the middle of gunfire, I thought of her. When I lay awake, listening to the wind howl through holes in our tent, I imagined her voice reading to me in that same calm rhythm she always had. I wrote to her dozens of times, but I never sent a single letter. I didn't know how to bridge the gap between who I'd been and who I was becoming. So I folded those pages and kept them in an old tobacco tin with the wildflower and a picture of us from a county fair, sun-bleached and creased at the edges. I carried that tin like it was armor. War is a kind of forgetting. It steals the present and muddies the past. But Evelyn, she was the part of me I refused to let go. Even when the rest of the world turned grey, Tunisia didn't welcome us. It tested us. Every hour under that sun felt like a year, peeling the skin off your bones, and the sand got everywhere, into your boots, your gear, your lungs, your soul. There was no shade, no real rest, no soft edge to anything. And in the middle of that, when the world had boiled down to sweat, blood, and the sound of distant shelling, there was Evelyn. She wasn't physically there, of course, but somehow she was. I saw her in the ripples of heat off the dunes, in the spaces between the stars during those few hours of sleep we were allowed. I'd close my eyes and find her again. On the porch swing, in that blue summer dress, hair pulled back with a ribbon, the scent of her skin rising up like a memory made real. She was never far, no matter how far we'd marched. We lost good men out there, too many. Some from enemy fire, others from dysentery, dehydration, despair. But I stayed standing, not because I was braver, not because I was better, but because I had something none of them knew I carried. A reason, one name, one promise. There were nights I could barely move my hands. The cold would set in so hard after the sun dropped that we'd huddle like dogs under tattered blankets, boots still on, rifles by our sides. And when sleep wouldn't come, I'd reach for that little tin I kept hidden in my pack, the one with the flower Evelyn gave me, pressed and dried, and the letters I wrote but never sent. I don't know how many I wrote. 20, 30, more? I lost count. Some were only a page, others 10. They weren't always romantic. Sometimes I wrote about the smell of burning oil, about what it was like to dig a grave in silence, about how afraid I was, not of dying, but of forgetting her voice. I poured everything into those letters, my loneliness, my guilt, my hunger for something that still felt human, and yet I never mailed a single one. Maybe I thought I didn't deserve to, after what I'd seen, after what I'd done. Maybe I was afraid she'd moved on, or that she hadn't and it would hurt her all over again. Maybe I was afraid she'd see the stranger I was becoming and wonder what happened to the boy she once knew. There's a moment every soldier has, usually somewhere between fatigue and surrender, where you ask yourself why you're still fighting. Not for country, not even for survival, just why? And every single time, when that question came, her face would answer, Evelyn, that name, that porch, that summer, that voice saying, promise me. I survive things I don't talk about, not because I'm hiding, but because I don't know how to explain the feeling of holding a dying man's hand when he's calling out for his mother in a language you don't speak. I don't know how to describe what it's like to hear silence after hours of gunfire, how your ears keep ringing with ghosts. But I do know this. The only time I felt whole, the only time I remembered who I was before the war, was when I read those letters back to myself. Sitting by a makeshift fire or in the back of a supply truck, I'd unfold one of those pages and read it like she was listening. And for a moment, just a moment, I wasn't there. I was home. Sometimes I'd imagine what I'd say if I ever saw her again. Not about the war. Never that. But maybe something small, like how I still remembered the pie her grandmother made every August, or the time we fell asleep on the hay bales in the barn, or how she used to hum that hymn I never learned the words to. I wondered if she'd waited, if she'd thought of me, if she'd ever felt something tug at her chest at the same hour I stared at the stars with her name in my mouth. But most of all, I wondered what kind of man I'd be if I ever made it back, if the version of me she remembered still existed beneath the dirt and scars, and if not, did I have any right to come home at all? The desert stripped away everything. Pride, arrogance, certainty. What remained was bare and aching, but it was also honest. And in that honesty, I found my anchor, Evelyn, the girl who never left my mind, the face that followed me through the sand. I came back in the spring of 1947. The war was over, the banners were long gone, and so were the parades. America had moved on, rebuilding, marrying, having children, chasing something they called normal. But I didn't feel normal. I didn't feel anything. Just the weight of all I'd brought back with me, packed tight behind my ribs, like a trunk I didn't know how to open. I stepped off the train at the station near Kingston, duffel bag in hand, wearing a uniform that no longer fit right, and boots that felt heavier than they had the day I left. Everything looked smaller, the trees, the houses, even the sky. Or maybe I was just bigger now, not in body, but in shadow. The walk to Evelyn's grandmother's farm felt longer than it used to. My boots scuffed against the gravel road I knew by heart. I could still picture the porch swing, the way it moved in rhythm with the wind. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd see her there like before, like time hadn't broken anything. But when I got there, the house was quiet. No swing, no laughter through the window, no scent of pies cooling on the sill, just peeling paint and a crooked mailbox. An older man came out of the barn, grey hair, thick hands, polite but wary. I asked about the family, about Evelyn. He looked at me squinting, then said, "They moved out a while back, after the war. Think they headed west, maybe Ohio, maybe further, lost touch?" He shrugged. "You a friend?" I just nodded. I didn't ask for more. I didn't leave a message. I didn't try to find her. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd see in her eyes. Maybe I didn't want her to see what war had done to me, the man she remembered. He was gone. And what stood in his place? I wasn't sure she deserved that version. I went back to town, got a job at the lumberyard thanks to an old school friend who didn't ask too many questions. Everyone was polite, welcoming even, but there was a distance in their eyes. They could see the war in me, even if I didn't talk about it. They knew by the way I flinched when a truck backfired, by the way I kept to myself, by the way I never quite laughed all the way anymore. I rented a room above the old hardware store. Nothing fancy. A bed, a desk, a chair. I kept the tin with the letters under the floorboard, behind a loose plank. I never stopped writing her even then. Letters she'd never read, pages she'd never touch. Some of them were filled with memories. Others were just silence on paper, trying to put into words something I couldn't say out loud. I never married. People asked, of course. There were kind women, smart, warm, strong, who offered friendship, maybe even more, but I couldn't give myself to anyone else. My heart had stayed in a field somewhere in upstate New York, wrapped in a ribbon and pressed into a page. No one could reach that place but her. Years passed. The world changed. Televisions appeared in windows, cars got sleeker, music louder, but my life stayed quiet. I worked, I walked, I listened to the seasons shift. In summer, I sat on the same hill we used to lie on and watched the clouds drift by. I told myself it was enough. But some nights, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the smell of gunpowder in my nose, her name in my mouth. Those nights, I'd open the tin, unfold one of the letters, and read it by candlelight. The words steadied me, reminded me I had once been more than a soldier. I had been loved. I never told my parents what I'd seen. They didn't ask. Maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they saw it in my eyes and decided that was enough. My father handed me a flask once and said, "The trick is to keep moving." I tried, but most days it felt like walking through water. There's a kind of silence that grows louder with age. It doesn't shout. It hums behind your ears, in your chest, in your bones. I carried that silence for decades, never broken, never shared, because some stories don't belong to everyone. Some are too soft, too sacred. They belong only to the person who made you promise. Evelyn became a memory I couldn't touch, a prayer I never stopped whispering, a ghost that never haunted, just stayed. I lived a quiet life, not because I was content, but because I couldn't imagine another kind. It was late in the fall of 1989, one of those quiet afternoons where the world seems to settle into itself. Golden leaves rustling down empty sidewalks, the smell of wood smoke in the air, and a kind of stillness that felt almost holy. I was sitting in the back booth of a small diner in town, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, flipping through the local paper out of habit, not hope. And then I saw it. A short column near the bottom of page 7, just a few paragraphs. It was titled, "Letters That Never Found a Home." It spoke of wartime promises, unsent love notes, and the quiet ache of what might have been. It was signed EM, contributor. But the moment I finished the second sentence, I knew it was Evelyn. Not because of the name or the initials, but because of the words. The way she strung them together, the softness behind them, the exact phrasing. Some goodbyes are not endings, just the beginning of a silence that still speaks. That's what she said to me the day I left, almost word for word. My hands trembled as I read it again, not once, not twice. I must have read it 10 times, sitting there with a piece of pie untouched, and the world suddenly roaring back to life inside my chest. I folded the paper gently, like it might break, and took it home. Sat at my desk, pulled out one of those old letters, one I'd never sent, and read it again. Then I started to write. I wrote her a real letter this time. No holding back. I told her I had survived, that I had come home, gone back to the farm, found nothing but echoes, that I never stopped thinking about her, that I never stopped writing. I didn't tell her about the war, not really, but I told her what mattered, that she had saved me in ways she'd never know. I mailed it to the paper's office with a note asking them to forward it to the author of the article, if possible. And then I waited. Weeks passed, then months. Winter came. The letter never came back. No reply, no message, nothing. But strangely, I didn't need one, because something had changed. Just knowing she was still out there, that she'd remembered, that those words were hers, that maybe she had written them for someone like me, was enough. It was more than enough. For the first time in decades, I felt something loosen inside me. A knot I didn't even know I'd tied. I started to breathe easier, to sleep longer, to walk without that slight hunch I'd grown so used to carrying. Evelyn hadn't answered, not with pen and paper, but her words had reached me. That was the answer. Some nights I'd reread that article. Sometimes I'd whisper my reply, not aloud, just in the quiet of the room where only memory listens. And I'd smile. Because even without a reunion, without a dramatic end, I knew now that our story hadn't ended in silence. It had simply waited. It's strange how a single voice from the past, even on newsprint, can restore parts of you thought were lost forever. She had no idea what her writing would do. Maybe she wasn't even writing to me, but I felt her in every line. And it told me what I'd always suspected. I wasn't the only one who had held on. She remembered too, even if she never said it out loud. Even if our paths never crossed again, I thought about writing again, maybe asking to meet, maybe flying out west if I could find her. But I didn't, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I realized I didn't need to. Some connections don't need to be reawakened. They've never truly slept. Evelyn was a part of my life's fabric, not a lost love, not a regret, but a living thread, quiet, enduring, invisible to the world, but holding everything together. If you've ever loved someone in silence, if you've ever carried a name through fire and fear, then maybe you'll understand this. Not all love stories end in reunions. Some end in understanding, some in peace. And peace, I've learned, is more powerful than longing. I'm not a man of many words. Never was. But if I've written all this, if I've chosen now, after all these years, to finally put it down, it's because I need someone to know. I survived because of a girl who never even knew she was saving me. Evelyn never asked for anything in return. She didn't wait by the window for letters that never came. She didn't expect the man she kissed goodbye to come walking back up the gravel road, bruised but smiling. She gave freely, her trust, her hope, her memory, and she never took it back, even after the silence. Some people think war is about fighting, about flags and orders and heroism, but I'll tell you what it really is. It's about what you carry, what you lose, and if you're lucky, what you still hold on to when it's all over. I didn't come home with glory. I didn't come home with medals anyone would remember. I came home with a tin box full of letters, a dried flower, and a memory of a voice that could still calm the storm inside me. I came home with Evelyn, not in the flesh, but in every quiet decision I made, in every time I chose gentleness over bitterness, in every silent prayer I said, without realizing it was still her name on my lips. Maybe she never read my letter. Maybe it never reached her. Maybe she moved on, built a life, forgot the boy who left with a ribbon in his pocket and the weight of a promise he didn't know how to keep. Or maybe she remembers too. I like to think she does. Not because I need it, but because there's something beautiful in that. In two people carrying each other quietly through the years, even without contact, even without confirmation. That kind of love doesn't need proof. It's proof enough that I'm still here. So if you're reading this, whoever you are, and you've loved someone the way I loved Evelyn, quietly, endlessly, without needing to be seen, know this: your love matters. Even in silence, even across decades, even if the person never truly knows. I write this now as a record, not for fame, not for pity, but because someone should know that a life was saved. Not by medicine, not by strategy, not by strength, but by the memory of a girl on a porch in a summer long gone. And if Evelyn ever does read this, if by some chance she finds these words in a book, a letter, a voice, I want her to know, you're the reason I'm still here, even if you don't know it. We share new stories every day, real stories that move and inspire. If this one touched you, like it touched me to write it, leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these memories alive.